Oh, hello, friends. David Vos here, and it's beautiful here in Oklahoma. Was just about a minute ago where the sky got a little darker, and I hear the wind back there a little bit. So hopefully the wind's not going to start picking up all of a sudden when I start turning this camera on. But it's got really cooler and looks like rain's coming, so that's nice. Well, friends, this is going to be the first in probably a series of videos that may be the most important series that we've done so far. And we always say that, but, you know, it may be true because we just keep getting deeper and deeper into this information. I wasn't really happy with the way the last series came out with because I had a lot more information. But rather than continue on with that series and try to get some of that information in there, I'm going to go ahead and start a new series because it may kind of go into some of that stuff, and we got to move on because there's some background information that we've got to figure out. I mean, we've been going along learning some very important information, but there's still lots of loose ends, and the reason for that is because it's very, very complicated. The Masoretic scribes messed around with the biblical text. The translators, since that time, it's been thousands of years, have messed with it. We don't have all the books. We don't have the book of Jubilees, Jasher. We just found out that where the Jews left off, starting off in Genesis with Abraham, basically. First 15 chapters, just a summary, just so-and-so begot so-and-so begot so-and-so. It's not much of a story, but it starts off with the story of Abraham. Gives us very little before that, just that basically the sons of God had relations with the daughters of men, and there were Nephilim, but it does not give us any information. That story about the Nephilim, the Garden of Eden, and who Ea is, and Enlil, and all these gods, the Elohim, there's gods. That was never really explained to us because we start off with this Jewish Bible that was thousands of years later. That was old Sumerian tablets, and they start off with their culture and their particular god because there's many gods, and each of these nations had their own patron god and so forth. However, what we are never able to understand, because we only got parts and pieces of this, is this God Yahweh isn't the only God. He's not, I mean, there's Elohim, that's plural. There seems to be a whole group of books in the Bible that they put in the category of the Elohist manuscripts. Then there's a group that they put into the list of the Yahwist manuscripts. The reason for that is because we've got the northern tribes, the 10 tribes. We've got Judah, which is the 2 tribes. And they fought at different times. Earlier, back in the day, they were all one nation. And then in the days of Solomon, it says that Solomon built an altar to Molech. And in Jeremiah chapter 32, it explains that Molech and Baal is the same thing. They were worshiping Baal by giving their children to Molech. And so Solomon builds an altar to many of these false gods. And about that time, this God Yahweh evidently gets so angry with the children of Israel that, well, they split up into 2 tribes, and right after that, they keep sinning even worse, and then the 10 tribes get taken off into Assyria. And then a little bit later, in about 600 BC, they took the tribe of Judah. So they had separate priesthoods. They always did. I mean, you know, from the time of Solomon on down, Rehoboam and Jeroboam split off, and they had 2 separate priesthoods, 2 different kingdoms. So some of their history is the same because they go back to Abraham and Jacob and so forth, but up to a point, and then they diverge. They had different histories, but Israel only had a short period of time as Israel, and then they were scattered into the world, and we talked about this in other videos, that they became the Scythians and so forth, and they went all over the world. And that's all very interesting stuff. But what we have to understand is that Israel, usually when they, in their manuscripts, refers to God as El, or ELYON. In the Ugaritic texts of the Canaanites, their highest god was ELYON. They used the term ELYON, the Canaanites did. So it doesn't matter whether you're Canaanite or Israel or Jew or whatever, everybody worshiped El. That was established. The Babylonians worshiped El. Now there was a higher god than that, but they all understood that there were plural gods. And the reason they were Elohim is because they all were subordinate to El. This is why, you know, there were the mountain of Elohim, the mountain of the gods. And the Greeks called it Olympus. It's the Ol, or the El. And the Greeks also use the word Helios, and we see the word heliocentric, because it all revolves around this El. We talked about the elves in the last video and stuff. But, so, what's the difference between Canaanites and Israelites? Well, we're going to find that there's not that much difference. This is going to get... there are going to be times when we're going to say things that's going to just literally blow your mind. We've had our mind blown so many different times, but there's just so much more to come until we get this all straightened out, because it is complicated, because they have tried to hide this from us. Remember, the Catholic Church came along, burned books. The Masoretic scribes went in there and took out all the names of God. You say, well, they did that because God's sacred and you can't say that name. Really? Well, why is it that these scribes would say, well, God's name is so sacred that we can't even say it, so we're gonna put the name of another false god, his vowels, we'll take it right out of Adonai, this god of Egypt, Adonis, or, you know, Adoni, or Adon, or Aton, depending on how you say it in whatever country you're in. But the Jews had Adoni, or Adon, or Adonai, depending on the tense of the word. And this was, in all the other nations, another god, a false god, according to the God Yahweh, right? But they take this false god, and they take the vowels out of it and put it into the name of YHWH. Why do you even need vowels in YHWH? Those are just vowels anyway. So you take vowels and put them into vowels. Something's up here. There's a lot that we've been lied to. They say they didn't pronounce the name of Yahweh, and that's why they did that. But there's a lot of evidence that the priests in Alexandria, in the days of Christ, and before that time, in the Maccabee period and so forth, they always did. The priests did pronounce the name of Yahweh. And they know how to pronounce the word. But some people say that they didn't want us to pronounce it, so they hid the name so that we couldn't pronounce the word. Well, this is interesting, because in order to hide this name, they throw a false god's vowels in there, supposedly. But, so what? They prefer saying a false god? No, because they claim you're not supposed to utter the name of a false god either. So when they come to Molech, they don't write it correctly in the Masoretic text. They substitute the vowels of Bolsheth for the correct vowels in Molech. So we don't even know how Molech is supposed to sound. You see, there's places where they take the word Baal out and put the word Bolsheth in. The Masoretic scribes would do that. Though, you ever notice that the word Astarte in the Hebrew scriptures is Ashtaroth? That's because they didn't want you to be able to pronounce the name Astarte. So they supplied the vowels for Bolsheth, which is another name for Baal. They put it into the word Astarte and got Ashtaroth. They changed the vowels. So it seems like they did this with quite a few of these deities. They didn't want you to pronounce. They're all sacred. See, this is what we've never been told, is that there were lots of sacred names of the gods. You were not allowed to be able to pronounce any of them. They were hiding it from you. The Jews were hiding the names of these gods. And there's something very, very strange going on, and that's what we're going to have to get to the bottom of. Because, you see, Amos chapter 5 and Acts chapter 7 says that for 40 years, the Israelites carried their tent, or their tabernacle, through the wilderness. And it says in Acts chapter 7, it was the tent of Molech. And they were worshiping and sacrificing to Molech and not to our Father in heaven. That's peculiar. That's very odd, because there was only one tent that Israel carried through the wilderness. It's not like they had the tent of Yahweh and the tent of Molech. So if Acts chapter 7 says that they carried the tent of Molech and they made their sacrifices to Molech, then we're going to have to figure this out, because you read the book of Exodus and Deuteronomy, and it says that it's Yahweh who did all this and told them to make these sacrifices. Yet you read Isaiah chapter 66, and it says, oh, who told you to make these sacrifices? You know, I don't want you to do this. You might as well kill a human or break the neck of a dog or sacrifice a pig. It doesn't matter to me, because he says, I don't want your sacrifices. I never asked you for any sacrifices. And, you know, and then there's Ezekiel chapter 22 that says, or is it 20, somewhere in there, where he says, I gave them laws that were not good, and statutes that were not good, and ordinances that were not good, that would lead to death. Why would God give them ordinances that would lead to death? And why would he then turn around and say, oh, I didn't do it. Not me. I didn't make you do that. I didn't say that. Obviously, there's two different gods. There's always two different everything. If you look at the Old Testament, you look at the book of Exodus and Deuteronomy, you'll notice that Moses went up to a mountain named Horeb. Horeb, the etymology of that word is orb. You know, like the orb of the sun. Or, even in Hebrew, means light, and in other languages. So Hor, or Horus, is the sun rising on the horizon. So Or is light. So the mountain of Horeb is the sun. And Moses, see, all of this is symbolic. But as Christians, we have not been able to understand that all of this is symbolic. Joshua is symbolic. He's a priest that goes in and transfers the authority of one God to the authority of another God. Because you see, there are 12 of these houses, and each one's going to rule in its own time. And so in the ancient days, if you go back to Babylon, you find out that the priest, he would officiate in front of the king or the ruler, because they were fighting these rulers. They wanted to all rule, right? So he had, as the priest, he was the priest of El, to officiate between these gods, is to find out who was going to rule. So he'd say, okay, now it's your time, go ahead. You know. So basically, it's all symbolic of the fact that we're going to have these 12 gods, and they're all going to rule, and they're all sacred. And some of the nations would have their patron god. They had all the gods, all of them. Israel worshiped Baal, they worshiped Zadok, they worshiped Dagon, they worship El, all of them. Solomon made altars to Molech, Baal, Chemosh of the Moabites. So, but you see, the Jews decided that their patron god for their country or nation was going to be Yahweh. Well, they didn't always believe that. When they entered into the land, when Abraham entered into the land, he meets a guy named Melchizedek. Most Christians are just absolutely not informed, because we don't speak Hebrew. How would we know? But Melchizedek is Molech Zadok. Interesting, because in the book of Jubilees, which is 200 BC, it's very old, and you know, it was originally in the Jewish canon. But without this book, we don't know. I mean, we're going to be able to show in this video today that the book of Jubilees has got to be true, because just a side note here to show you that. But there's in the book of Luke, it says that between Arpachshad and Selah, of this line of kings back to Adam, there's a guy named Canaan. Whoo, buddy, what's Canaan's line doing mixed between Arpachshad, the son of Melchizedek, and Selah, and then Eber, the Hebrews? Well, the book of Jubilees explains this. Without the book of Jubilees, you wouldn't know. And so obviously we need the book of Jubilees. But this is what the book of Jubilees says. It says that there is that Canaan married Arpachshad's wife, or had relations with her, thereby uncovering his father's nakedness, because his grandfather was Noah. And Ham stole the garment that Yahweh made for Adam and Eve. They had these garments of skin. They were holy garments, and the word covering in Hebrew means atonement. It's the same word. When you make atonement for someone, you have to have blood. You cut the animal and you cut its throat and let the blood run out. And the skin, you eat the flesh. You get some sort of temporary life from this sacrifice. And you take and you're atoned, or you're covered with the garment. And they made tents. They made the tabernacle out of it, the covering, the holy atonement. So this holy garment was handed down from Adam to Noah. Enoch had it, and all of them, Lamech, and then to Noah. Well, you see, the story is not completely, it's just a parable, so we don't understand what's going on. Why would Ham, first of all, Ham seeing his father's nakedness, we don't know that in Leviticus, that means that it's something sexual. You know, if you sleep with your father's wife, his concubine, or sleep with your sister or your cousin, you're uncovering your father's nakedness. It's just a thing it's an expression in Leviticus. But the other thing is that usually a lot of times in the Bible there's a play on words, and it'll have two meanings. So Noah was naked for another reason, because he had this robe. See, what are they doing fighting over a garment? Because they want power. They want to rule. The line of Ham was, he's bad, he's evil because he stole the birthright. Okay, but Jacob stole the birthright too. See, these are just stories. We don't know that some guy named Ham didn't come over there and, rip his father's coat off and sleep with his, wife. As far as we know, Canaan, the child of, when Ham slept with Arpachshad's wife, it doesn't say he raped her. It may have been mutual. Or, we don't know what happened. Maybe it's just a parable. But the point is, it's talking about the transfer of the line from one to the other. Because remember, Enlil and Enki's always fighting. Cain and Abel, Esau and Jacob. These two lines. But Jacob stole, yes he did. He said, well, he sold it, for a bowl of soup. So it was legal. Well, but then he lied to his father. And he put hair all over his body to try and convince his father that he was Esau. So he lied, and so he stole the birthright. So Jacob stole the birthright, and yet we think Jacob's great. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that's who we follow, right? Well, the people in Canaan, they followed their father too, Ham, and he stole the birthright. Well, then his son Canaan is the child that is from this union of Ham and Arpachshad's wife. So this means Arpachshad's the son of Shem. So who is Shem? Melchizedek, Molech, Zedek. Well, in the book of Jubilees, we find out that Melchizedek's wife was Zedek, righteousness. So these names are a biblical code, and you need to understand when you see these names that they're very explanatory, and they're trying to show you that there is a transfer of authority from one god to the next. See, Molech is a god, it goes back before the flood. He was the god of the underworld, and he had Rephaim and Teraphim, the valley of Rephidim, where Mount Sinai was. It's just they went through the valley of Rephaim, and then there was Sinai. Well, Sinai is the moon. That means moon, the lower law. He went to Mount Horeb with the sun. Now he's at Rephaim. He's at the valley, the low plain. Where is that? Where the low plain of Rephaim is at the southern end of Jerusalem. It's the valley of Hinnom. It's hell. And Jesus was crucified at Topheth, where Solomon built the altar for Molech. and sacrificed children to Molech. Because, you see, Jesus wasn't sacrificed to his Father in heaven. Our Father in heaven didn't want that. He was sacrificed to the demons, to Satan, to Nergal, according to the Sumerians. Well, many other names for these gods. They were all very sacred. And Jews didn't want you to pronounce those names because they knew they were power. And you see, people worshiped Molech for thousands of years, and then they worshiped other gods, and different nations had their gods. And, in some cases you needed to call upon a god of love, or the god of the heaven, or the god of the earth, or whatever. The earth god was a woman, Damkina, Ninhursag, and some people call her, Mother Earth. So, the sea god was Poseidon in the Greek, right? But in the Bible, it's Yahweh. He's the god of the abyssials, Ea. But Enlil was the god of the air, the god of the sky. Zeus, the thunderbolt, the god of the sky, same god. Well, the god of heaven, Anu, is heaven. And all of these gods work together on the wheel. And, so you may be ruled over by one god if you're born in the world at a certain time. Or you may need, at this particular time in your life, circumstances are such that certain influences are influencing you. This is what this is all about. See, according to this God Yahweh, he didn't want you to worship these gods. He didn't want you to do any astrology or divination, of course, supposedly. And yet, his priests did divination. They had 12 stones. They represented these 12 gods. And they and they called them the teraphim. They were these spirits, the spirits of the giants, these gods, the giants. They were sent to hell, the bottom of the wheel. And so they were called the Rephaim, the valley of the Rephaim, and the bottom of the valley, in the Gehenna. And so when you sacrificed to Molech, you were sacrificing to a god who you were appeasing this place of hell, the lower realm. And so this is why when Jesus died, his blood ran down right into the valley of Hinnom, from Topheth, right into the valley of Hinnom. Because, you see, that's what that god wants down there. Molech, he wanted your blood. He wanted your children. You say, well, why does Yahweh then in the Bible say, I don't want you sacrificing to Molech? Why would Abraham's name be Molech? Well, the Canaanites were in the land. They worship Molech, okay? Well, Melchizedek is Shem, right? Who is Shem? What's the deal here? Well, you've heard the story of Nimrod and Semiramis. Semiramis was Maramis or Mary, and they have this, she's the virgin, and then they have this son. It's Dumuzi, and it's this grand trinity, and we all read the two Babylons, right? And we were told that's all pagan, and so it's Christmas, and Christians got mixed up with paganism. Well, hang on. Melchizedek, according to the book of Hebrews, is the son of God. Woo! With neither beginning of days nor end of life. Who is Melchizedek that he'd be called the son of God? Well, remember the book of Enoch, the Sumerian tablets. It says that Noah was a son of the gods. He wasn't just an ordinary human being. He was basically half God. And so Noah's son was Shem, and he was the son of God, of the line of Anu, back all the way down through Adam. He was the grand king priest. And this is why we get the word Molech to mean king, because it's the line of the kings, the royal blood, the son of the gods. And Noah's father was Lamech, L-M-K, excuse me. L-M-K, Lamech. But Molech is M-L-K. So it's got all the same letters. So all of his children in that line always takes on the combination of those three letters. The children of Amalek. Oh, that's the first king that Joshua tried to kill when he went into the promised land. And then he ended up taking Adonizedek and crucifying him. Joshua, which is Yahweh is Savior, goes in and kills Adonizedek, or Adonai is righteous. You see, they all thought they were righteous. They, Molech. Then later on we find there's Abimelech. Abimelech is Abi, father, Molech. Molech is my father. Well, Abraham meets him and says, hey, you want to have my wife? They were going to make a pact, a covenant. And that's how nations did that. They made covenants. See? We'll serve the same gods. We'll live in the same land. We'll be brothers. How about it? Abraham says, sure, let's do it. You have my sister. She's my sister. And to see if we marry each other's sisters, then we're blood. See? Well, this is a symbolic story of how Canaanites and Israelites were blood. That's how come Canaan got in there. There were always a bunch of Canaanites and a bunch of Israelites. So, Yahweh said, no, I don't want you to do that. ELYON has a plan. He's gonna use Abraham, because this other line of Canaan is going to eventually wind down, and I'm going to go a different route. This is why you get to the Elimelech and Naomi. Elimelech is God is Molech, but he didn't have any children left. He's got one son, Molon, and another one, Chilon. Well, the ending on means that these are children of Molech on, see, the children of descendants of King Anu or King On. So these are this is the holy Melech or king line, royal blood, back to An. But they don't have any more children. They're dying childless. And so this woman named Ruth, which is the child, this man's wife, she doesn't have any children. So the story goes that they do a Levirate marriage, and they go get Boaz to raise up children for Elimelech. My God is Molech. Oh, buddy, because you see the line from Melchizedek came down, and then it had no more heirs. And so they switched it to the line of Judah. Well, there's a whole bunch more to this story, because it's really the line of Joseph. Joseph was married to Asenath, which is the daughter of Shechem, a Canaanite. But so that's the line through back to Molech, or Melchizedek, was through Joseph. But in this Levirate marriage, they combined the line of Judah, the line of the Canaanite line through Melchizedek, and the line of Judah, Joseph, and Melchizedek. Those three lines were transferred, because you see, Naomi was a widow. She had no more children. And she was a Canaanite. You see, because Boaz's mother was Rahab. Yeah, Rahab the Canaanite from Jericho. So there's always this Canaanite blood mixed. And it's a welding together of these two lines. Because by divine providence, our Father in heaven, just like with Jacob and Esau, I mean, they were twins. You know, this is a story that it's all the way through the Bible. So these names are a code to tell you that something's going on. So then there's this code keeps going out throughout the Bible. Jesus meets a woman by a well. Oh, there's that well again, right? That Abraham goes to, and it's Abimelech says, hey, that's my well. And Abraham says, no, I dug that well. Thank you very much. And so Abimelech says, well, I'll tell you what, we'll share it. So Abraham and Abimelech, the father is Molech, they make a covenant. And it says there in Genesis that it's an olam. In Hebrew, that means eternal. They make an eternal, forever, absolute, solid, with blood covenant. Abraham makes with the Canaanites. And he says, we're going to share this land. That's what Abraham said. Later on, 500 years later, Moses comes along and says, I want you to kill all the Canaanites. But Abraham, he loved them. He's going to share his wife with him. Make a covenant with him. And finally he did, even though, you know, they said, now we're going to use your children. But, yeah, go ahead and make this eternal covenant with him. And share the well. Because we can all share. So they make an eternal covenant. And Abraham says, here's 7 female lambs and they make an eternal covenant. So Jesus comes along and he finds a well, and there's a woman, and she's a Canaanite from Samaria, from the northern tribes up there, where the Canaanites lived, and they worshipped at Mount Gerizim. And this is where Shechem is. And the daughter of Shechem is Asenath, that Joseph married, the Canaanite. So this woman's by the well, and he says, go get your husband. She says, well, I don't have any husband. I had 5 husbands, but, I don't have any husband. Jesus said, yep, you don't. You're a widow. Naomi was a widow. You don't got no husband. You're a Canaanite. That's it. Salvation is of the Jews. Now we're going to transform the lineal descent that you guys hold, and we're going to give it to Boaz. Oh, his mother's a Canaanite. Don't worry, we're going to keep it in the family. See, it's going to be, the seed of the woman is going to be the Messiah. The seed of the woman is the Canaanite woman. It's always the seed of the woman is a Canaanite. The Rahab and Asenath and all the way down. So, that's what these little words are trying to tell you, is that there's a reason why, because, here we are as Christians, and we're reading the Bible, and we're scratching our head, and we're saying, what are the Canaanites doing in this land? And why does God tell them to go kill them all? And if you'd had any common sense, if you were reading the Bible and you knew any of this, which we don't, so we never catch on, but we'd have found out that Melchizedek means Molech, Zadok, and we're like, why is the son of God? Because evidently Noah is a virgin birth, right? And so the son of God is Melchizedek, and he's going to rule the world. But of course, Canaan's son, they call him Molech. That's his name if you look in the book of Jubilees, because it's got to carry on this name. But as Christians, we're looking at this, and we would, if we ever thought of it, it ever popped into our mind that, man, this guy's name is Molech, and Abraham made covenants with Abimelech, and all of this stuff, we'd be like, scratching right. Why? Because we never were allowed to read the book of Jubilees and find out that this is all in the up and up. They're all sacred names. And Yahweh, he's just one of these gods. Now, our Father in heaven don't want us to worship any of these gods. He doesn't want us bound to the physical world. You see, you can do you can have respect for these gods. You can have respect for the world. You can understand who they are. But we've got to get beyond this. Jesus told the woman at the well, she said, shall we worship in this mountain or in that mountain? And Jesus said, neither in this mountain nor in that mountain, but in spirit and in truth. We don't need this anymore. We don't need all these ceremonies. This is just symbolic. This is a parable. These gods that rule the flesh, we can be beyond that. We're going to find this inner spiritual man and follow after the Spirit. So, as a Christian, we're not told that when Jesus was crucified, he was crucified at the place where Solomon built an altar at Tophet to Molech. We're not told that Jesus' blood ran down into the valley of Hinnom, which is hell. Jesus says, standing there at the valley of Hinnom, he talks about how that land, that valley where there was sulfur and it was fire and it was always burning, and he likened that to hell because it was the lowest place in Jerusalem, in the area. The low plain of the Rephaim. The Rephaim are the gods, the giants that are inhabiting the low places, the hells. And they demanded your blood. It's the physical world that demands your obedience. You have to have respect for these deities. And, remember Rachel took the teraphim, Rephaim. This is the, like it says in Acts chapter 7, it says they worship their god Molech. And they carried their tent and their Rephaim. That means these little statues, these little idols that they also used the teraphim as an oracle, to learn, because they consulted it. There were 12 of them. They consulted these gods. And, you know, Laban had some Rephaim, some teraphim. And Rachel took them. They were the household gods. And she didn't, you know, she loved them. That was the gods that they used to worship. And that was being transferred to Yahweh. But, you see, if they were so bad, why didn't Jacob get rid of them? But no, Jacob buried them somewhere in Shechem. Well, he buried them in Shechem because that's the capital of Canaan. It's their God. He didn't want to let it, you know, put their gods back, right? Because that God's powerful. We don't even say his name. Add some other vowels in there because it's a sacred name. You don't want to call upon that because Jehovah was jealous and he only wanted you to call upon him. But then I guess the Jews decided you shouldn't even call upon him because that's powerful too. So we ain't going to say the name Yahweh. If you knew his name, see, that's what these rituals and these spells are about, is, you know, knowing certain things, certain names. They're the names of the gods. 72 gods, because there are 72 servants or deacons in this wheel. There's 3 to each of the 24 gods. There's 3 of these deacons. So all of the gods were the names of the gods, and they all ruled by the authority of El. But Yahweh was a jealous God, and he didn't want you sacrificing and your children to Molech. Really? Well, then how is it that Acts chapter 7 says that Yahweh is Molech? Because when you're looking at the book of, see, the Jews have screwed this all up so that we don't understand the Bible anymore. Because when you're looking at the book of Exodus and Deuteronomy, as we said, Moses goes up to Mount Horeb, the sun, and as soon as he gets to the top of this mountain, you know, he gets this truth. He's shining, he's bright, he's seeing God. Well, the people couldn't look upon him. The sun is too bright, man. You can't see that. You can't handle that. The truth. You can't handle the truth. So he had to veil his face so that the children of Israel could even look upon him. That means that he took and he put this holy truth into this parable of this law covenant, which is a lesser truth. It's just veiled. You're not seeing the direct sunlight of love, but you're just getting these carnal commandments. And then it describes it in the parable as Mount Sinai, which is the moon, a lesser light. And it describes how he busted the first commandments because he came down and they were worshiping a bull. Well, you see, that's what they carried with them for those 40 years, is this sacrifices and these laws and all these carnal commandments. This was the God Yahweh, the God Molech. So it was our Father in heaven that said, it wasn't me who gave you these laws. And it's Yahweh who said, I gave them laws that were not good. See, remember, Yahweh's a deceiver. You know, he's always saying stuff like that. He sent down some deceiving, lying spirits to Saul. Why would he do that? Because Saul means son, soul. So Samuel, the prophet of El, he anoints Saul, the son, to reign over Israel. But Yahweh didn't like that, so he sent down some lying spirits. So then Yahweh comes along and teaches David's hands for warfare, and, you know, on, and David has a bunch of wives, and he starts worshiping all these other gods. And they're all sacred names of the sacred gods, and Yahweh's jealous, and Yahweh has his prophet, Elijah. Elijah goes down in there. And now, first of all, let's take a look at this Elijah thing. Where did Elijah worship? We didn't worship in Jerusalem, we worshipped in Bethel. This is just a few miles from Shechem, Mount Gerizim, where the Canaanites, the Samaritans worshipped. And it says, you know, when Abraham first came into the land, he went to a place where there was this tree. It was the trees of Tabor, the trees of Morah. was always these little grove of trees where he would find a rock, 12 rocks usually, and put them in an altar, as an altar. And he would bless this rock and make a high place. He would put the rocks on a high place. So whenever the prophets would get together, they would go to a high place. This is in your Bible. Later on, Yahweh didn't like these high places, and he tried to get rid of them. But the prophets, they were always worshiping on a high place in a sacred grove. So, who were they worshiping? Well, it's gotten very confused. Elijah is Eli-Yah, El-Yah. And so, Elijah, he comes down, and Asa, which is the king of Judah, he's now made another covenant with one of these Canaanites, and he's got Jezebel as his wife. So they're trying to repair this breach that's been going on, for a long time. And so, just like Abraham tried to make a covenant with the Canaanites, now Esau's making a covenant with the Canaanites. He's got one of their wives, and she's a prophetess of Baal. She tries killing all the prophets of Yahweh. And she makes an altar to Baal. So Elijah comes in there and says, how long will you guys be limping on two opinions? If Baal be God, worship ye him. If Yahweh be God, then worship ye him. So he says, here's what we're going to do. And he makes an altar. Right there in that same place, right there at Bethel, he makes an altar and he makes a trench and puts water in it. And he puts his sacrifice on there. And he says, now you prophets of Baal, you call upon Baal and see if he'll come down here and prove that he's God. So they hollered and hooped and cut themselves and cried and wept and, did a dance and so forth. Baal never came. So then, he gave them their chance, and Yahweh said a prayer to Elijah said a prayer to Yahweh, and the fire came down and just sucked it up, and the fire ate up the prophets of Baal. So all the way through the Bible, we've got this thing with don't be an idolater. Even in the New Testament, don't be an idolater. What they don't tell you is we're not supposed to worship Yahweh either. We're supposed to worship our Father in heaven, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. But you see, there's these transitions. What we don't understand is that there were these gods, and at the bottom of the wheel, there's the three houses that are in hell, the three houses that are in the water, and then there's the three houses up above. Zeus is up here. Yahweh is the god of the Abzu, which is the abyss. And Nergal, or Hades in Greek, Pluto in Latin, but Nergal was the god of the underworld. Well, one of these gods of the underworld was called Molech. And the teraphim were the gods that were thrown into the bottomless pit, the Tartarus. The teraphim, or the old gods. They used to worship the teraphim before the flood. Because you see, if you look from Adam down to Noah, you've got 10 people. Adam and Seth and Enos and all the way down, and Lamech and then Noah. There's 10 of them. And then you get the flood. Well, if you look at astrology, you've got Aries. It's the first one. Then you've got Taurus. Then you've got Gemini. You've got Cancer. Then you've got Leo. Then you got the Virgo. Then you've got Libra. And then you've got Scorpio, Sagittarius, and then Capricorn. Okay, so, but there's 10 that are before the flood. And then you get to Pisces and Aquarius. That's the water. Aquarius is the water bearer. And Pisces is where the fish are. So this is the flood. So before Aquarius, now Aquarius is ruled over by Saturn. Saturn is, in Greek, it's Kronos. So they've gone to this place called Carthage, which is northern Africa, where they used to worship Molech. And it's got the word Molech on their inscriptions there, and they know that this was the worship of Molech. All the prophets talk about it, and certain individuals like Plato and stuff. Well, Plato and Diodorus, Plutarch, different ones describe the god as the god Kronos, and they describe him as this big copper bull, goat-looking thing with his hands stretched out like this, and they would put the baby right into his little arms, and it would go down a little chute right into the fire. And while the baby was going into the fire, they'd play some horns so that the parents couldn't hear the baby screaming. Well, Kronos is another word then for Molech. Well, see, Kronos is Saturn, and Saturn rules down there in Aquarius and Capricorn. Capricorn is that goat-looking guy, right, with the horns. Sometimes he's Pan, sometimes he's, just different names. But he's the Saturn, or the dark sun, or the Saturn's a very large planet. They couldn't see beyond that. In the ancient days with their naked eye, they couldn't see Pluto and Uranus and stuff like that. That's why there's 7 planets, and it doesn't include Uranus and Pluto and that stuff. Or Neptune. They didn't see those gods. Today, there's people that want to put that in the astrology, but they didn't have it in those days because they didn't see it. So this was Saturn was the furthest sun or planet out there, and it ruled the dark side. And so that was Kronos, and remember, that was a bad god. Remember, Zeus had to open him up because he swallowed his brothers. Why did he swallow his brothers? Because, you see, the dark side swallows up 6 of the 12 gods. And so Zeus had to open up his dad and bring his, because the sun will go up in the sky and rain, and it'll go down, and it'll get conquered again for a period of time in the darkness, and it rains again. So there was this cycle going on. And Zeus conquered his father Kronos. So in the story, Yahweh is transitioning from this Molech. Yahweh is in the abyss, the abyssio, and Nergal, or Molech, or Hades, he's down there in hell, and he wants your children. But you see, these gods played out their little struggle, and they fought. And they were all children of the Most High. All of the people on the earth are the children of the Most High, and these ancient priesthoods, these sacred names and these sacred gods were worshipped by all the nations. And the Jews have their own God that was jealous and didn't like them, and they didn't like him either. And they were fighting. But when Jesus came along, he got up on that hill and he said, all right, take me. And his blood ran down and appeased that God in hell, because his Father in heaven says this is enough. I want you guys to understand, we've all got to go through the fire. We've all got to go through the water. John the Baptist represents the Aquarian man. He says, you should be baptizing me. Oh, Jesus, I ain't worthy to untie your sandal. And Jesus says, well, we all got to go through this. Just let it be so this time. So John baptized Jesus. Jesus represented all of us going through this, down into hell and conquering it and coming out the other side. Jesus went to hell for 3 days and 3 nights. So they asked Jesus, we're going to prepare for the Passover, when horrors on the horizon, we're going to rise into the sky. March 21st, the vernal equinox. We're trying to prepare for this. How do you want us to prepare? Jesus says, well, go into the city and you'll see a man with a pitcher of water. And the Aquarian man, you've got to get cleansed. The Jews had 7 purification jars at the great wedding, right? And before we get to the wedding, we've got to go through the purification. Got to go through the bottom of the wheel. And so he says of those born of woman, there's no greater than John. No greater. The greatest prophet that ever lived. But those in the kingdom are all greater than he is. He says, I'm going to go on decreasing, and Jesus is going to go on increasing. See, that's that old law of Yahweh. It's just a bunch of purification rules and commandments. It's not our Father in heaven. That's not God. But he overcame the other gods that were before the flood. The ones down there in Scorpio and Capricorn. That goat demon that ruled Satan, Saturn, Kronos. And so it was a transfer of authority. When Melchizedek came into the land, he was the priest of the order of the Most High. So was Jethro. Moses became a herder of Jethro's sheep, not the other way around. Jethro was the high priest, the priest of Midian. And Moses became a herder of his sheep. But when the angel Yahweh, says that his angel started talking to him from a burning bush, right? And he was very angry. He says his anger blazed up, and he was so angry at the children of Israel that he put them under this strict law. So he veiled it. So he went to his uncle Jethro, that was his father-in-law, and they got together and they said, what are we going to do? These people aren't, the world's not ready for the truth, for the higher laws of Horeb. So they veiled it, and they made, Jethro said, here's what you're going to do. You're going to wear yourself out, Moses. There's too many people. So let's make a priesthood. That way, people can't go directly to God. We'll hide the names. We won't tell them what's going on. And we'll just tell them stuff like, we're going to transfer to a better situation. When people were down there in hell worshiping this Molech, we're going to switch it over to this God Yahweh. But that's not the highest God. We're not explaining the whole thing to them. That this is all the spirits that rule in this physical carnal world. See, it's a step up. It's a step up. And when the New Testament came along, they said, don't get involved with idols. They couldn't explain to all the Christians there all of this ancient wisdom. But it's all there in the parables. Jesus comes to the woman at the well, and he says, you're a widow. Salvation is of the Jews, because the Jews brought this new religion and transferred the authority from Canaan through Melchizedek down through Canaan, because he usurped the lineal descendancy and married Arpachshad's wife. So all the children after Arpachshad were sons of Melchizedek, sons of Shem, and also through the woman, sons of Canaan. Well, this is the way it was until Elimelech, who came to a place where he had no more children of the sons of On. And so they transferred it with a Levirate marriage to a Jew, Boaz, keeping Canaan in there because his mother was Rahab the Canaanite. But it was a transfer. It was showing that they were transferring from this nation who worshiped Molech to another nation that was worshiping Yahweh. And so Baal is, according to Jeremiah 32, the same as the worship of Molech. These little Baal idols, or these teraphim, or these ghosts, these spirits, the devils that were reigning in hell, that ruled down there in the valley of Rephaim, in the lowest place in Gehenna, where the fire and the sulfur was to the day, in the days of Jesus, was still smoldering down there. And they would throw the dead bodies down there when Rome came along and they started crucifying people up there. They did it near the Valley of Hinnom, because that way, after the body was taken down off the cross, if they were just a criminal, they'd throw them into the Valley of Hinnom, which is representing the fact that they didn't serve the resurrection. It would send them to hell. It's all very symbolic. They knew what they were doing. And everything they were doing in their life and their national pursuits and all of these kingdoms was worshiping all the same gods. So they all knew about these particular gods. And this was just one of the holy rites passed through the fire. Even Jesus talked about it. He says, you know, you got to get baptized with water, but he says, I'm going to come and baptize you with fire. You got to get baptized with fire too. You've got to suffer, and you've got to learn by the things that you suffer. And then you've got to go through the water and be cleansed with all these rules and regulations that Yahweh comes along with. But that's not all you got to do. We all got to do it. Even Jesus had to do it. He had to get baptized. We all got to go down through the waters in the river Jordan 7 times, right? Until we round and around until we get cleansed. And there was a time when we worshiped those gods. You know, we had to respect them and obey them because they were our authority. We were just, as the Bible says, stewards. We were under stewards until the time appointed. See, really, we're the Son of God. We got authority over all of these powers and all of these kings. We've got authority over Molech, because we have the authority in the name of Jesus. His name is more powerful. There was a time when the name of Molech was so powerful that the Jews wouldn't even write it in their scriptures, because they knew if you had that name, you'd have power. So Jesus walks up to the Pharisees and he says, let me ask you something. Do you really know what your Bible's about? They're like, well, what are you talking about? You know, Jesus. He says, well, I got a question for you. You know, why is it that Elijah, if he's your prophet, and I'm sure, you know, he's a great prophet because he's your prophet, right? Of course, he ain't worthy to untie my sandal, but okay. So your prophet, Elijah, you know, he went down to the widow in Zarephath. It was a Canaanite city. Was there no widows in Israel? Was he going down there to this Canaanite widow? He goes to the widow of Zarephath, and there's a famine. They ain't got nothing to eat. The widow of Zarephath, she's just got one little jar of flour and a little jar of oil. That's it. Her spiritual understanding and her truth and her nourishing spiritual food, she ain't have much left. Okay? This is the truth that they had that was left over from their priesthood back to Melchizedek. It's all they had left. Just enough to spiritually feed her and her son, or the king, or the heir. So, you know, remember, Naomi was a widow, right? And her son, she had no more sons, right? She's a widow. Same with this woman, the woman of Zarephath, a Canaanite woman. She's a widow. And she can't take care of her own son's about to die. She's about to be childless and heirless. Represents the Canaanites. And their prophet, the prophet of Israel, where did he get his truth? Where did he get nourished? Not from Israel, but from the Canaanite woman. Was there no widows in Israel? Nope, there wasn't. He had to, you see, the woman who was nurturing the prophet, the king priest, she's the one you got to go to. They're the ones who had the mysteries. The Canaanites, they had the mysteries. Because the story in Jubilee goes that Canaan, when he first entered into the land, he found this rock with this ancient writings that told him all these mysteries. They were writings from the Watchers. They were the original gods. And it gave him this great power and this priesthood. Well, what did he go into the land in the first place for? Well, in the book of Jubilees, it explains that Japheth was given the north, Shem was given the middle, from this land of Palestine all the way over into India. And Ham was given Africa. And they were all told, each of the children, where they were going to go. Their land was all portioned out. And they were told not to encroach upon someone else's land. You go to your own land, and you stay there, and you raise your children there, and you have your families there, and your nations. But do not go and live in somebody else's land, because that was punishable by death. And everybody understood it. So, Canaan, he didn't want to go all the way over to Africa, because he was given West Africa. Well, on the way to West Africa, he stopped off in Palestine, and he thought, man, this is beautiful. I guess it was a beautiful place. It says Shem got the best portion because he was the firstborn. So his land was the best, in the middle, where it wasn't too cold like it was up in the north, where Japheth was, or too hot down in Africa, but it was just right. And they had these hills and these beautiful streams and a land flowing with milk and honey, the Garden of Eden. So, how dare Canaan stop off in Palestine and take up residency there, right? It's not fair. He knew he wasn't supposed to do it. On the other hand, didn't Jacob know that he couldn't steal the birthright from Esau? I mean, isn't it wrong? Well, that's the story that we got, see? Canaan said, you know what, my dad's Ham. And remember that story about how Ham slept with Naamah and carried on the seed of Cain. Remember, Cain was the firstborn. So it's never been absolutely established who really is the firstborn. Right? The first kid came out, Zerah, with a red ribbon. He's the firstborn. Then he pulled it back in, and out comes Perez. We're not sure who's the firstborn. But there was a fight. And Canaan thought he should have the firstborn. So he goes in and has a relationship. They make a covenant with Arpachshad's wife. And they have a child named Molech. And this is this royal blood all the way back to Anu. And it ends at the time where Elimelech, El is Molech, they don't have any more children, and his wife Naomi becomes a widow. And so Jesus sees the widow at the well, and he says, yeah, you're a widow. Salvation is of the Jews. We're going to switch it over to Boaz, and he's a Jew, back to Judah. And then Judah goes back to Abraham, back to Shem. So it's the same line. But we're going to preserve the fact that Canaan is going to be in there. It's just a transfer of authority to Abraham, because Melchizedek blessed him, and Abraham gave Melchizedek a tenth of everything. So there's all of this stuff going on in the Bible that very few people are understanding. And we get to the New Testament, and we see these little parables, but we don't understand it. We don't understand why Jesus healed the Canaanite woman. Why does Jesus say, well, can't be healing you because, got to take care of the children of Israel first. And she says, yeah, but even the dogs eat the crumbs off the table, And Jesus says, I've never seen a greater faith in all of Israel. And he healed her, the Canaanite woman, because, you see, they have faith too. And our Father in heaven came here to heal that breach. Abraham made an eternal covenant with these people. And the blessing finally was given to Joseph. And Joseph married Asenath, which is the daughter of Shechem, which is a Canaanite. So it stays into the family, and it gets really, really complicated and very, very intricate. And we're going to get into this even deeper in the next video, friends. Hope you guys have a really good day. We're going to go ahead and close here because we've gone a long time, over an hour. But we'll get back into it in the next video. See you guys tomorrow. Have a good one.